All right, then we are live now. Good evening and a very warm welcome to everyone present in today's session. I, Pragnya Panda, welcome you to the Stories of Beliefs and Social Customs, curated under the TMYS Review, June 2022, in collaboration with Global South Colloquium, University of Victoria. We are also calling for the submission of essays, poems, and short stories under the project. To know more about the submission guidelines and the project architecture, please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. This evening, I consider myself very privileged to be in the company of our esteemed panelists, Dr. Sharbani Banerjee Mukherjee, Miss Piyali Mitra, and Miss Nandini Sarkar, who will shortly share their views and insights with us. The topic of today's discussion is gender inequality in ritualistic practices under the sub-theme Festivities and Ritualistic Practices. All of them are experts in this area with many years of professional experience. So, before we start today's discussion, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker for tonight is Dr. Sharbani Banerjee Mukherjee. She is an associate professor of English. Her areas of interest include modern and postmodern English literature, American novels, post colonial studies, Indian English literature, feminist studies, and gender studies. Articles and seminar papers written by her have been published in numerous journals. Dr. Banerjee is the co editor of the American novel From Hawthorne to Heller, Cultural Contexts and Critical Perspectives, Macmillan Education 2019. She also presented a paper at an international conference on post-colonial studies at the University of Lille, France. We welcome you, ma'am. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much.
Our second speaker for tonight is Ms. Piyali Mitra, who is a doctoral researcher in philosophy and bioethics from the University of Calcutta, India, and an alumnus of Woolf Institute, University of Cambridge, UK. She has been a trainee of the Global Bioethics Initiative, an organization in New York City, USA, working under the aegis of United Nations Academic Impact in Action. She is a visiting scholar and has participated in the Council for Research and Values in Philosophy of the Catholic University of America McLean Center for the Study of Culture and Values in 2021. Her passion for writing led her to publish her book on poetry, Of the Heart and Soul, a Mellifluous Whisper, for which she was awarded the Words Brew 2021 Best Author Poetry Award. She also received the Best Poetry Author 2021 award conferred by Lit Voice magazine. The bestseller Blue Rose Awards 2021 has been presented to her for the mentioned book. We welcome you, ma'am. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Pragya.
Our third speaker for tonight is Miss Nandini Sarkar. She is a global equity, diversity, and inclusion leader, India in interim for APAC in Australia. She is a trust advocate, culture champion, collaborative change maker, learner, and leader. She is a dynamic HR leader with a passion to drive real and sustainable change, with significant global and regional experience in developing and fostering a diverse and inclusive workplace culture. She is a committed champion of communities. She serves on numerous committees set up for women empowerment, women in STEM, policy and advocacy, and CSR cross industry associations at state and national levels. She's partnered with NGOs being a voice of change, working in the social justice and equal rights space. She's a mentor to women on hiatus and students on campus to career transitions to enable them to achieve their full potential. We welcome you, ma'am. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much to be here.
So now we open the forum for discussion. I would request Dr. Banerjee to begin. Ma'am, over to you now.
Thank you so much. I'm not really an expert in this, as you have said, but well, these are interests I'm sure that all us women share, and all us women we thrash about and we say, why is this so and why is that not so? So these are, good occasions where we can at least voice our questions and our angers and sometimes also find out ways of solution. So thank you very much. The topic for discussion today is indeed very interesting in the sense that rituals have always been one of the socio-cultural forums where a society creates its own identity. And in that case, we find that that is where all the androcratic, patriarchy, you know, agencies come into force, and they sort of reveal their very cleverly guarded agendas through these various customs and rituals, not just in India, but in every religion all across the world. Now, it is not possible for us to know what happens everywhere, but in a general, stance, we know that the major socio-cultural venues where the men and women congregate are for weddings, for funerals, for in India, like for rice ceremonies, in the Christian community for baptisms, in the Muslim community for their nikahs, their marriages. So these are where the customs, the traditions have been wrought in such a way that somehow, knowingly or unknowingly, the men have always taken the forefront and women have been categorized as secondary citizens. And this identity creation, when we talk about this, I actually want to go a little back before I come to rituals, though I know that we just have about 8 minutes or so, 8 or 9 minutes to talk, and I'm sure I will wind up within that time. That I will go back to the genesis of religion, because it is religion that guides us to the socio-cultural ethics. Now, if we go to the very ancient religions that have evolved, thousands of years before Christ, like the Hindu religion, like the Greek religion, we will find that there are places in these religions, almost equal places for men and women, in the sense that there are equally powerful gods and goddesses. Zeus may be the king of gods, Indra may be the king of gods, but then there are so many women goddesses who control a major part of the religious panorama of the Greek religion. Similarly, in the Hindu religion, we have the goddess Durga, her various, alliances like Chandi, like Kali, and then there are other. The goddess of education is Saraswati. The goddess of uh, uh, wealth is Lakshmi, wealth and prosperity, and so on. But when we come to the comparatively newer religions like Islam and Christianity, which almost began around the same time, what we find from the Old Testament, you will find that Allah and God are men. And that brings me back to the Christian Bible, especially Book of Genesis, which clearly says that women are weak. Adam was the perfect creation by God, and Eve was born out of Adam's rib, and she was a kind of a facilitator for Adam to help him in his activity, to be his companion. Eve was constructed because Adam would be lonely, and thereby Eve would follow what Adam says. From the book of Genesis, if we come to the 16th century, in the 17th century, where Milton is writing his Paradise Lost, so many 1600 years later, in Paradise Lost, book 4, where we are, we are made to see Adam and Eve functioning on the Garden of Eden. Eve absolutely, sort of almost psychologically, she lies prostrate at the feet of Adam to say that you are my maker, you are my master, you are my source of happiness. Whatever happens, I depend upon you. So that is where these religions have been divided, and these ritualistic subordination, segregation, marginalization, peripheralization of women came when these Greco-Roman religions and Hindu religions come gradually in contact with the newer religions like Islam and Christianity. In our Rig Vedas, we find that men and women would sit together and perform the yagnas. They had the right to give the ahutis, Maitreyi, Lopamudra. They had the Gayatri. They had the power of creating shuktas and slokas for the Rig Veda. But gradually in the Middle Ages, the changes, the regression in society was seen. The Parda system partially came in, and gradually Brahminism took such a patriarchal leadership that women were gradually forestalled. And this brings me to the rituals, how these rituals were made, tools of subordination. For instance, if a man died, if a man or a woman died, the Mukhagni, or the touching of the fire to the body, lighting the funeral fire, the rite was for the male child. In those days, I'm not talking about these last 50 years, but prior to this, if the person who was dead did not have a son, the daughter did not have the right to do that duty. It was either uh, sort of a nephew or of the brother's son, not sister's son, only brother's son of the male generation. They would have the right to light the funeral pyre. They would have the right to perform the shraddha. And because they did the shraddha, in society's eyes, they became the son. And the economic, practical catch was that they would inherit the property, the land, and all the other, the whatever the dead man has left behind. So the funeral became a sort of a kind of a site that would differentiate and segregate the men and the women. In weddings, we see that it is the man who performs I'm talking about Hindu marriages, of course, where the man is doing the yagna, the woman is just sitting beside her like the facilitator. And when the marriage is performed, it is the woman who changes her surname and takes on the surname of her husband. So she carried the surname of her father, and now she's carrying the surname of her husband. So these are the rituals through which, the women have been segregated. And yet, I come to my last point, some rituals were initiated into the society in the form of bratas, that the woman would keep fast, the woman would do some special prayer, the woman would be given some special, activity to do. It is interesting that despite the subordination, despite the subjugation, being the voiceless, silent other, these women of society, they found out little avenues of their, the widening the scope of their imagination, the widening they would take in, steal in little pleasures out of the suppressive dogma. During these rituals, they would fast, but at the end, they would have a lot of goodies to eat, like, sweets and milk and cheese and fruits, and they would make puris and luchis, similarly, things like that. They would get some pleasure out of that. It would be a kind of and they would go together. It was a kind of a collective activity of women, and they created a world, a little might of their own. Also, these what you call rangolis, the alponas, these were avenues, the stitching of the kathas, stitching of clothes, of shawls. These became kind of their expression of their creativity. And that was why, in these ways, they used the brathas as tools to circumvent their subordination of masculinity. I think it's time. I will stop now and then wait for the questionnaire to discuss some more.
Thank you, ma'am. That was indeed informative and insightful. I would like to now request Piyali ma'am to take over and express her views.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Now I'll take over from where Professor Mukherjee, Banerjee has stopped. Well, I would speak on gender bias in various cultural and religious ritualistic practices. So we can see that discriminations against the girl child in many countries is a well documented reality, and it reflects serious gender based differences, inequalities, and neglects. In fact, there is a general perception is that most family girls suffer deprivation from the very womb till the tomb. In fact, the complex structure of the culture and socio-economic factors prevalent in patriarchal society is responsible for this persistent discrimination. And in the name of cultural rituals and religion, gender biases are probably the oldest issue of inequality that women faces. The implications that various rituals have for women, from how they must behave, be in submission to men, or to control over their own bodies, like abortion and contraception, are considered a kind of a sin, to how they may even think, where a woman suffer because their woman is told or taught, and the man is considered as the head of the wife. In fact, many religious rituals lead to sexism and dogmas which violate the principles of equality and social justice. Actually, in the name of religion, in the name of God and cultural practices, people have really enslaved others, kidnapped and castrated young boys to sing in choirs. In Christian practices, infant practice genital mutilation so brutal that millions of young girls have bled to death, sacrificed slaves, prisoners of war to ensure victory, or to improve the harvest or to avoid natural catastrophes, even burned babies alive on altars, as we see in the tantric practices, devised or approved of implemented vicious tortures to extract confessions, stoned adulteress, and even brutally murdered witches, homosexual, blasphemers, heretics after first torturing them near to death. So we draw a line and say a just society, a modern society, does not accept racism or slavery regardless of the religious justification provided. However, when it comes to sexism, we not only allow people to practice it in the name of their God, but we actually endorse it. In fact, anti discrimination laws in modern countries prohibit discrimination based on gender, but often with a special exemption for religion. But why? We do not grant any religion exemption from child abuse laws, from laws against racism, from laws against homicide. Yet, for some reason, we do not question exempting institutions from behaviors which exclude and marginalize women. As a result, one of the most fundamental rules of modern society, the equality of individuals, may be abridged by anyone claiming women to be inferior because my God told me so. Why do we continue to accept this deplorable rationalization for abusive and backwards behavior when we no longer accept it in any other area? Even more importantly, why do we shrink from challenging religious teachings children that females are unequal and inferior creatures, indoctrinating them into misogynic beliefs, perpetuating discrimination while stealing from little girls their dignity, their equality, and the chance for a rich and fulfilling future? Well, should any entity, just because it says, my God told me so, be given society's permission to teach children that discrimination is a God blessed activity? Is that consistent with our beliefs in justice and equality? Don't our children deserve better? Don't they deserve the right to grow up protected from prejudice in a world free of discrimination with the right to mature into the full potential free of any arbitrary barriers to achieving it? Next, how can full equality and religious faith be inconsistent? Are we not all equal in the eyes of a creator? Ah, yes, religion replies, we are all equal, but men and women are different, thus justifying different roles. In fact, let's leave aside that different, to say in quotes, actually does not justify different roles. The very essence of humanity is our individuality. That one person is different from another tells you absolutely nothing of what they can and should do with their life. Instead, let's consider the source of Holy Scriptures. What is the origin of these God defined rules for male and female? Well, patriarchy means that the recording of a creator's wishes has been entirely in the hands of men, and not even all men, just the dominant men of their time. A small group of males who were literate got to document, interpret, and define God's wishes, to decide what would be in the Holy Scriptures, what would be excluded to dictate to everyone else what God intends for them. So we can see there are various limitations even in the role of men in religion. However, across differences of class, race, ethnicity, sexuality, age, and religion, one of the few commonalities that men share as a distinct group is the gender privilege. Achieving gender equality is not possible without changes in men's life as well as in women's. The most painful devaluation of women is a physical and psychological violence that stalks them cradle to grave, and patriarchal values regulating sexuality, reproduction, and social productions expressed through specific cultural metaphors. Overt rules prohibiting women from certain important specific activities and denying certain rights did exist, but the more subtle expression of patriarchy is through symbolism, that is, giving messages of the inferiority of men through legends that highlight the self sacrificing, self effacing, pure image of woman. It is also expressed through the ritual practices which day in and day out emphasizing the role of women as faithful wives and devout mothers. Also, women are trained not to challenge discrimination, subordination, exploitation, and subjugation at various levels in the system. These norms restrict women from having aspiration beyond marriage. Similarly, for men, gender norms are constructed around masculinity, and a man's sense of self hinges on his ability to control women. Until the daughter is married, her protection and chastity are considered as a mark of the father's honor and masculinity. Even when you see in the sexual division of labor and masculinity, for example, if you consider the Indian society, a statement like home and childcare test suited to women, while business and profession test suited to men, has for a long time been receiving an unquestioned social approval. In fact, the social cultural norms have by and large restricted the role of women to the bearing and rearing of children and attending to household chores, and women are not expected to involve themselves in work outside the home. An oft quoted verse from the ancient Tamil classical Sangam literature has explicitly stated that the soul of a man is in his work outside, whereas the soul of a woman is in taking care of the man. A synonymous term for woman in the Tamil language is ilal, one who rules the home. A woman's connection to the market and the public is derived from a connection to her husband and family. Similarly, a woman working for payment outside her home has been lowly valued and less respected. A woman working as an unpaid family laborer in a family's firm is more socially acceptable than a woman working in the same field as a paid or wage laborer. Well, depending on different social values ascribed to men and women, there are variations in male female job polarization. The effects of stereotypical thinking and gender bias influence women and men as do their higher education, producing difference in their career expectations and choices. Young men receive a message from society that they should prepare themselves for a career that would support a family, whereas young women get a different message that careers will be less important than their men's. Even higher education confines women with little chance for advancement. Well, an essentially collectivistic culture with strong patriarchal underpinnings, India is currently at the crossroads where its traditional gender norms intersect with egalitarian aspiration, a critical juncture that will determine not only the future of gender parity in India but also the subsequent socio-economic growth that is expected to result from women's increased participation in paid work. With the presently available statistics and data locating India's current position on the gender equality spectrum is undoubtedly a formidable task. While women's participation at work, which is still far from being equal, has certainly improved over the decades. It does not necessarily reflect enhanced gender parity. To begin with, a sizable proportion of female students resort to dropping out of school as they hit puberty because of the lack of access to menstrual hygiene products, and those who managed to complete their education often had to compromise on the choice of career due to factors like safety and proximity of the workplace and other reasons. Moreover, working women in India are still expected to single handedly take care of household and childcare responsibilities, in addition to their paid work, which is a key reason most working women are more likely than their female male counterparts to feel overburdened and experience family to work spillover. Likewise, in most cases, it is a woman who is expected to quit her job and relocate after marriage. And on the organizational front, women have to face issues like wage gap, maternity harassment, and glass ceiling, etc. Therefore, it is evident that gender inequality in India is a convoluted problem which cannot be gauged purely on the basis of statistical data pertaining to women's workplace participation or enrollment in higher education. The problem is deeply entrenched in our social structure and requires developing a cultural specific understanding. In fact, child marriage is an important social menace, although illegal, are not void but voidable. A child marriage can be declared null and void by a court when either party to the marriage files a petition under Article 3 of the 2006 Prohibition of Child Marriage Act. The prevalence of child marriage has been declining slowly over time, but due to population growth, the total number of child brides continues to increase in many countries, and female education is considered a strong predictor of child marriage. It is proved that child marriage highly persists among uneducated women. Parents often stop their daughter's education before could complete her elementary or secondary education to reduce the financial burden of the household. Poverty is the leading risk factor for girl child marriage, and child marriage is prevalent among poor families because they have limited resources and incentives to invest as alternative options for girls. Connection with poverty, unemployment, expensive educational cost, and the rising cost of marriage are some of them. Even the poor marginalized families' desire is to marry off their daughters as soon as possible. Moreover, the anxiety for protecting the girl at home if both the fathers and mothers work outside the home triggers them to the victimization of child marriage. Other drivers include social rituals and the need to reinforce social ties and perceived protections. Parents often think that they may be able to progress the social position through their daughter's marriage. On the other hand, parents may hold the faith that by marrying their daughters at an early age, she will be protected from sexual abuse and unwanted pregnancies. Moreover, in Indian society, traditional practices like the dowry system leads to higher prevalence of child marriage. Natural vulnerabilities also wreak havoc on economic operations and family well-being, negatively impacting populations, particularly the poor and vulnerable, such as children, women, and the elderly. So I would like to say, like with socioeconomic development, the amount of dowry increased over time and it has been replaced from social custom to social crime. And the quantity of dowry has controlled by various conditions like the groom's socioeconomic status, bride's beauty. However, there are substantial variations of the item of dowry payment. In fact, some societal norms might accelerate the incidence of forced marriage of girls at an early age. In the future, what will occur if a suitable bridegroom cannot be found? These angst often exist at the back of child marriage in rural India, and improving the strategies which promote higher education will reduce the occurrence of child marriage. Moreover, from secondary to higher levels of education, women's studies should be included in the curriculum. As a result, it would enhance knowledge regarding women's rights and legislation. In fact, different organizations such as the non-governmental organizations called the NGOs, self-help groups, and local administration can play an essential role in increasing the public's awareness of the risk linked with child marriage. Girls should be given equal rights in society. If girls are given a strong social value, then girls would not be considered as a burden to their poor families. Contrarily, improving family income will also reduce the incidence of early marriage. Therefore, policymakers and government should pay special attention to rural and marginalized communities by providing economic benefits and employment opportunities for women. I thank you for your patience in hearing, and I leave it to the house. And over to you, Pragya.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That gives us a lot to think about. I would now request Nandini ma'am to share her views with us. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Pragya. We heard Dr. Sharbani bring in the genesis of religion, and she took us to the kingdom of gods and the Vedic age. And there's a trend which is very straight or a blend that we see as a resonance in the society today. Piyali, you brought in inequities from womb to tomb, making my life further easy because I am left with very little to say. However, let me try and see what I can bring in as a flavor from the corporate world of India. Now, here's an invitation to my dear audience for a journey as we think together and look towards becoming a part of the solution. Now we live in the data abundant world, and here's a spotlight on key few. At present, overall, the women's workforce participation rate in India is at 20.3%, 18.2% in urban India. As I said, I invite you to think together with me. Women's employability is at 51.44% for 2022 compared to 41.55% in 2021. Now, while women represent about 50% of the population, they earn only about one third of the labor income for it. The India Supplement 2022 report reveals that when 84% of households in the country during the pandemic saw a decline in income in a year marked by tremendous loss of lives and livelihood, there was a number of Indian billionaires growing from a 102 mark to 142. As I said, reminding you, think together. We can be part of the solution. The Global Gender Gap Report 2021 brought in the concept of labor market scarring, in which temporary limitation of in-house, in-person work due to pandemic is said to cause permanent and long-lasting effect on women's chances at decent employment in future. Now, we are all aware of how we saw sudden spikes in cases pertaining to domestic violence and sexual harassment in the digital world. We also saw a spike in child marriages. The marginalized community, like the LGBTQ plus women, have experienced deeper scarring mark and impact on their lives and livelihood. Now, gender inequality in India is considerably on the higher end of the spectrum. Now, the share of the female labor income in India is equal to 18%, which is significantly lower than the average in Asia, which is 21%, excluding China, and is among the lowest in the world. Now, although the number is slightly higher than the average share in Middle East, which is 15%. I'm just giving you a spectrum to understand where we stand and where we can impact. Now, aspects of gender inequality in Indian corporate landscape are mainly with respect to employment opportunities. In top management roles, we hardly see women. So, the glass ceiling research report on leadership gender balance in NSE 200 companies by an IIM Ahmedabad faculty and team released this February is an eye opener. The study reveals only 5% women have made it to the top management, whereas another 7% have made it to the senior executives. Now, gender gap in pay is a glaring fact of today. The same study spills that gender disparity plagues pay packages as well. So, as women are continued to be paid 17% less than their male counterparts for the same role. And then we know that the trends in promotions and recognitions do not offer any positive picture to be amplified here. Now, it's very important to understand those who are at the epicenter of this impact. How do they feel? That is, women in corporate India. A recent LinkedIn finding caught my attention. So, though we see difference in perception of available opportunities in the labor market for men and women, close to 37% women who were responders to that survey say they have lesser access to opportunities, while 25% men agree to this. We also see disparity in perception of conversation on equal pay as more women, 37% approximate, say they get less paid than men, while 21% of men share this sentiment. More than 7 in 10 working women, which correlates to 71% respondents to the survey, and working women, which is 77% of the respondents, feel managing family responsibilities comes in the way of career development. Two-thirds of working women and mothers say they faced workplace discrimination due to familial and household responsibilities. Now, job security is critical for working women in India, but there is a different vibes there. They say that they are lying more emphasis on the type of employer they choose to work with, the recognition they will get for their work, and the skill sets required. Now, how deep are these issues and its economic relevance for a developing country like us? Women across different regions and cultures and classes spend an important part of their day on meeting the expectations of their domestic and reproductive roles. Women are under the double burden of performing paid and unpaid labor. According to statistics presented by the OECD Center, the wealth a country possesses has a negative correlation to the gender inequality in unpaid care work. The social norm of gendered differentiation of labor thus makes it harder for women to enter and remain in the labor market. The conundrum of unpaid work, care work, is only increasing in India given the shrinking family sizes because we are now in nuclear setup and resulting time poverty faced disproportionately by women. The Deloitte Global Survey of Women at Work states that 39% women worldwide feel that their employers are doing, that their employees are doing enough to support women at the workplace since the pandemic, and the numbers are lower when it comes to LGBTQ plus women. Now, as we realize from the data points where the gap lies, we heard the societal and the economic influence on our mindsets, and as we grow through the stages of life experiences, it has its own effect in the way we think, or rather in the way we prefer to think, which brings in definite bias at the way we make people decisions in corporate. Now, while the policymakers, industry bodies, and corporate houses have a heavy duty to be intentional about enabling more women in the workforce participation, applying various levers to close on the gender gaps, I have another lens to offer us here. Here's an appeal to all girl students and women out there. We need to find the strength within us to make choices that impact our career and lives. Look for those allies around you who can fuel your aspirations. Understand, settling it down in life is not all about marriage. Because the moment you set in that mindset, marriage, mobility, and maternity, as we say, the three M's of a woman's life, kickstarts. So it's beyond marriage. Find the you in the us theory of family and choose what defines you. Accept the choices you make. Very critical because I mentor a lot of women who come with that guilt syndrome. They have gone the family way. And when they have to take a back step when it comes to a fast paced advancement in career, then they set into a depression mode. But the choice of going the family way was yours as well because you are a party to it. And own your choices with confidence. Don't need to emulate men to be a leader, which is a very critical syndrome that we observe in the corporate world. Women start emulating men to be a leader. Whereas I believe women can lead by their feminine leadership attributes, which the workplace needs. That is empathy, care, intuition, and together all it becomes humanity. To all parents and educational institutes, my appeal is to be an ally, enabling a lens for all the girls, students, and women to look beyond the obvious, educate the minds of young boys to understand gender parity from the foundational years of their growing through practices at home and educational institutions. Help the girls and boys together to realize what is the art of coexisting in a safe and respectable ecosystem. We need to understand the concepts of psychological safety way early in our life than stepping into a corporate world and being trained as an intervention by diversity, equity, and inclusion because it's too late. Media and entertainment occupies a great portion of how they shape and influence us in our thinking process. Since they are a powerful vehicle of social message and change, there is a high duty, or rather, a heavy burden on media and entertainment to rise up to the cause of bridging gender gaps by stopping to eulogize socio-cultural practices that endorse gender inequalities further. India has evolved to become a strong regional and political player in shaping the development policies, not just for South Asia, but the whole of global South. Through it, it is true for most South Asian nations as well. Women have been kept at the lower end of wealth and income brackets through various practices, be it discriminatory policies and social structures, lack of access to lucrative jobs and labor market, or the double bind of performing both paid and unpaid labor. Women have only been earning a third of the labor they have promised for. Without adequate focus in the policy change, India faces a threat of leaving behind a half of its population in this road to recovery. Not to mention, bear the brunt of inequalities even further. We need to revisit the labor distribution in our country and rethink formal and informal structures at a policy level. There is a need to enhance the social security mechanisms for informal workers with a special focus on women, upskilling women for hard professions and adopting a care lens is hence essential for determining care work and would contribute to redistributing it equally amongst family members, irrespective of their gender. It obviously is also important to create gender sensitive fiscal policies and educate the masses about the criticality of rising inequalities and formulate a framework of labor issues to sustain in the new liberal world. With this, I turn it back to Pragya. Thank you for patient hearing.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was indeed thought provoking and informative. I am sure that the advice that you gave will strike a chord with many. We would now like to move to the question and answer round. My first question is to Dr. Banerjee. Ma'am, patriarchy is deep seated in every religious practice. All religions promote the idea of equality. However, in all the rituals across religions, as you mentioned, be it weddings, funerals, or pujas, why do you think that the men are given the performative roles while women do most of the labor required behind those roles? Ma'am, can you please unmute yourself?
So
Thank you,
sorry.
ma'am.
Thank you, Pragya, for that question. This is a question that I'm sure all women have been asking since the time of the creation of civilizations. Like, why are we left behind? That is simply because um, men have systematically, through the ages, taken advantage of the fact that they are physically stronger than the women, and they have automatically assumed that they are psychologically, intelligently, sensitively stronger than women. And that is why, since the creation of civilization, They made the rules, they took the calls, and they have sort of in every ritual, in every activity, uh, they have taken the leadership. Even today, I'm talking about the 21st century. Even today, you will find that if there is an important discussion in the home, the man of the house, if the woman of the house tries to put in a word, the man of the house would say, "Oh, you don't understand. You can talk later." So this, silencing of the voices in very little ways, and the woman has to assert herself and say that, yes, I know as well as you do, if not more. So in every performative role, that was what I was saying, that women would be given the power. They have taken upon themselves the power to give the ahuti, to do the yagya, to chant the mantras. I want to share a very interesting fact with you, that if you question if there are any grandmothers in your houses, you ask them that women were not allowed to chant or to read the religious book of Chandi. আমরা বাংলায় যেটাকে চণ্ডীপাঠ বলি, the Chandipat was not allowed by women, though women were allowed to read the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, because they were all, patriarchally subsumed texts. But the Chandi was not allowed. And it was, I am lucky that my mother's grandmother would read the Chandi. She defied it in those years. My mother learnt it from her, and I learnt it from my mother. And when I feel very weak and down or upset, I go to my prayer room and I read the Chandi, because, and I would ask you all to read it as well. I mean, it is one of the most, femininely and strengthening texts that was ever written. A woman would understand the power within herself, from the root of her hair to the nail of her toe, how strong she is, how emboldened she is. That is, understandable. And the women were debarred, because even now when I read the book, I get so much energy. I feel so strengthened. And the men did not women to feel energized. So it was the agency of the patriarchy to keep the women behind. You will find in ancient, in even 20, 30 years ago, women were told, don't wash your hair on the day of the birthday of your husband, don't do this on that day, don't. These were kind of, regimentations given to a woman, so that she is debarred the independence of even washing her hair or clipping her nails, or sort of going out of the household. So these were all kind of politically constructed agencies by the androcracy.
Thank you so much for your answer, ma'am. I would like to ask my second question now. So, in many contexts, even in instances of history, for example, Queen Elizabeth I, she was addressed as the Virgin Queen, and there have been rituals and practices that categorize women as deities and symbols of purity. Can you share some of your ideas and observations regarding this practice?
Thank you. That is again a very, very controversial topic, even today, because virginity has come to, not come, has been throughout, has been elevated to the position of the, holding the banner of honor of a family. The question of virginity has always been so important. You know that in Islamic marriages previously, the nuptial bed would be spread with a white sheet, and the next day the sheet would be openly exhibited to the world. uh, and if there are spots of blood, that proves that the girl is pure and the marriage is going to be a happy one. Other than that, the woman is questioned. In our world, when we have been, using the bicycle, we have been scaling trees and doing a lot of physical activity, playing games, The hymen does not always stay where it was, whether it is a virginity issue or not. And why should a woman be questioned on whether she has, you know, cohabited with a man? Why can she not do it when she wants to, if a man can do so? Now, as I was thinking about these topics, I have come across, and you all know that in many areas, doctors have on the sly made a lot of money by stitching the hymen back on the girls prior to them. And the parents have taken the daughter to the doctor. I forget the term, there is a technical term for that, I think hymenoplasty is the term, where a hymen is attached to the girl if she has already lost it. There is also the question of clitorectomy. So a child, her clitoris is cut off so that she does not have the urge and the pleasure of sex as much as God wanted her to, because we were created by God, and it was the patriarchal, uh, uh, you know, warped, I should say diseased attitude that a woman should not, even anticipate the pleasure of sex and to have a clitorectomy. In Ghana, there is a practice that when a girl attains puberty, when she begins her menstruation, she is taken to the community in the center. She is made to lie down naked, and her uh, her vagina is slit open, and the elder of the tribe and a couple of other chosen full-blooded men are they perform intercourse on the girl, and then she is nicely stitched up and sent back. That is a kind to ensure that her virginity remains intact and she is de-virginized by the chosen men of their chosen tribe. These are some, there are many other horrific tales where a woman would be stitched up only so that she could urinate, and she could not she could not even have sex with a man in order to maintain her purity. So these are all, virginity has some, even today you find in the UK, in USA, in India, especially in North India, you have, stories of honor killing, where a girl, because she is maybe in the same religion, she has just married into another caste or into another creed, and she is the man and the girl are killed. So virginity, and Elizabeth, you mentioned Queen Elizabeth the First. Queen Elizabeth the First's virginity is the most questionable issue, because if anybody has read history, we all know that she was anything but a virgin. Rather, she liked to be known as the Virgin Queen, and she made love to all the young and handsome knights who were there to protect her. And she took advantage of their wish to be gallant and manly, and she got them to burn the Spanish. William Drake went and burned the Spanish Armada, and she got them to do all sorts of fights. She got them to imprison her choicest rival, Mary Queen of Scots, and have her executed in the Tower of London. So that is what virginity is all about.
Thank you, ma'am, for the answer. That was very, very informative and thought provoking. I would like to now ask my next question to Piyali, ma'am. Ma'am, my first question to you is that a lot of religions across the world repress women's rights in general and reproductive and abortion rights in particular. Can you talk about the impact of these practices in terms of health risks women face? Ma'am, can you please unmute yourself? You're not audible.
Yes,
Thank you.
what I'm saying is that the Reproductive and abortion right is a very controversial topic and hotly debated both in the Western as well as in India. In fact, religions have always sought to control the reproduction by means of controlling women. And today we see a global growth of authoritarian religious groups and movements, which are often described as the fundamentalists. So, though originating in different religions, all seems to have a major focus the control of women's fertility. And there is something very ironic in the fact that outside of the feminist movements themselves, the only movement which daily devotes hours and hours to discussion, debates, decisions, summations, and setting up policies on the question of women is a fundamentalist movement. No issue occupies so much space in the consciousness of its activists as the question of women, their character, behavior, traits, and especially their power to tempt and seduce. In fact, we can see that the image of women as mother and homemaker is often seen as under threat even in apparently secular countries like Britain and even in the US. And we see that the sense that contemporary culture devalues children and motherhood has been identified as a strong impetus behind the pro-life movement that has been taking place in the US. Well, the pro-life supporters feel very strongly that there is an anti-child sentiment in society which is expressed in the strong cultural norm that families should have only two children, and women's autonomous sexuality and control of their own fertility are an anathema to fundamentalists. Women's autonomy is a threat not just to manhood but to social orders. And this may be one of the reasons why abortion has come to occupy such a central place in the 20th century Western consciousness. And as a key signifier of reproductive choice, abortion becomes a focal point in the ethical conflict between rights and duty. The struggle between a woman's right to choose versus her duty to procreate or to be punished for engaging in unlawful sex reflects much wider fears about anarchy and social disorder which dominate contemporary social thought. And any attempt to disentangle the issues contested in the abortion dispute must start with distinguishing the legal controversy from the ethical controversy and recognizing how they are related. In fact, we can see that the legal controversy over abortion tends to focus upon the validity of the view, as we see raised in Roe versus Wade cases, that the Constitution guarantees a right to privacy, which in turn grounds a woman's right to choose what medical procedure she wants done on her body free from state interference. In fact, the ethical controversy largely turns on the question of when and where whether the fetus is considered a person with the same rights, especially the right to life, as other acknowledged persons. In fact, we can see that there is a particular philosopher called the Vance who has argued that although it may be valid for anti-abortion ethicists to hold that fetus is a person, it is just as valid to hold that fetus at least prior to some 20 weeks is not at all a person. And he has been thinking this, that the right to metaphysical religious interpretation of a biological facts of how we look at a person can be grounded upon the fact that the Constitution guarantee of religious freedom, the belief whether the fetus is a person is essentially a religious belief, and the imposition of religious beliefs and practice is prohibited by the amendment of the constitutions. In fact, a woman facing an unwanted or unintended pregnancy finds a relationship with her body, her community too often, the view of God presented in her religious tradition severely breached. Her selfhood, her life is threatened with a very real sort of death unless her community and religious tradition provide hope for new life. That is a worthwhile sense of self beyond the breach. And in most developing countries, induced abortion remains an illegal practice. Yet, this happens where women choose clandestine abortion to end their unwanted pregnancy, and the practice of clandestine abortion is frequently unsafe, involving health risks as well as economic suffering for the woman and her family because of the high price paid for the service. And restrictive legislation penalizing both the woman who seeks an abortion and the practitioner who offers abortion service can be the key determinant of the unsafe abortion. In addition to legal strictures of abortion, we can see that religious influence has placed abortion outside the realm of what is morally correct or acceptable in the collective consciousness of many societies. So, when we say it is the word of God, we must follow them religiously. It brings us to the question whether isn't our creator but kind of some of male, a priest, a rabbi, imam, religious scholar who decides for women based on his personal feelings that women were unclean, inferior things, what women could do or what they should do and what they must do, and who got to cite God as the authority of his fatuous beliefs, his prejudice, his fear and loathing of the female sex. It is this entirely male based fantasy of God wishes which has led to the ongoing, pervasive, scandalous, and destructive abuse of females, their mother, mutilation, beating, confinement, even imagine you're spending your entire life in a COVID quarantine. That's what Sparda system looks like. That what is meant by how the men controls the reproductive autonomy of even the woman. There's a lack of education, subjugation, and poverty. So religion, I can say, rather than admit its culpability, double down on its misogynistic beliefs and persist in fighting off any change. It continues to ignore and to destroy the lives, hopes, the concerns, and the futures on one half of the human race. Thank you, Pragnya.
Thank you for your answer, ma'am. My second question to you is, do you think most rituals across cultures are patriarchal in nature and are assigned to men because men are biologically believed to be aggressive and powerful?
Okay, this is a very important question. I'd like to point out, like certain common trends are visible across all cultures, owing to all pervading patriarchy. In fact, gender discrimination in various forms is promoted in the family through the process of socialization. In fact, like playing with dolls, helping mother, sister in the kitchen or household work are projected as not a man's arena, and boys who resort to them are labeled as effeminate, not only by elderly men but also by the peer group members. From a younger age, boys are taught that expressing sorrow, crying, is not a trait of real men. The male child is conditioned not to express normal human feelings like fear or sorrow, and that is why the male mind has to banish the feeling of tenderness, rectitude, sensitivity from his mindset and create defensive armor of audacity, humanity, estrangement, and loneliness. And there begins the search for power and control to feel the sense of security. The race for power leads to the vicious circle of the inability to develop human relationships and not realizing the worth. In fact, male dominance is one of the earliest known and most widespread form of inequality in human history. A starting point for many theories of gender equality is the assumption that biology is destiny. The roles men and women play in society and the different privileges attached to these roles are said to be fundamentally determined by our genes, which are in turn the product of natural selection. Predictability, sociobiologists assume a biological genetic basis for the division of labor by sex, male dominance, and the double standard. In fact, the origins of sexual inequality are seen as an outcome of genetically programmed male behavior derived from the species hunting heritage and continuously selected for sins by war and imperialism. In fact, Dr. Edward O. Wilson has stated in his book, the New York Times Magazine, in the article that human descends in animal, where he said that in hunter-gatherer societies, men hunt and women stay at home. This strong bias persists in most agricultural and industrial societies, and on that ground alone appears to have a genetic origin. In fact, he says that his own guess is that genetic bias is intense enough to cause a substantial division of labor in the most free and most egalitarian society. Even with identical education and equal access to all professions, men are likely to continue to play a disproportionate role in political life, business, and science. Even in the Indian society, for example, a statement like home and childcare tastes sweeter to women, while business and professions taste sweeter to men, has for a long time been receiving an unquestioned social approval. In fact, men's expression of masculinity is closely linked to controlling women in their family and ensuring that women fulfill expected roles. Women who do not fulfill essential roles or who challenges men's actions threatens men's masculinity. And men and masculinity pass as a norm, but women and girls are the gender that needs protection and control. In fact, what is interesting to explore is that these actions seem to display is a real harmful impact upon women in society as the manner they choose to engage with their sexuality arises through channels of coercive sexual behavior and sexual control. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer, ma'am. I would now like to ask my questions to Nandini ma'am. So, ma'am, my first question to you is that a lot of rituals and stigma against women deny them their rights to succession and inheriting property, remarriage, etc. Can you enlighten us as to why, despite stringent laws, such rituals prevail?
Very simple, and I guess this stems from the religious practices. Now, there's no single body of property rights for women in India. It gets determined depending on which religion you follow, whether you're married or unmarried, which part of the country you come from, and if you are from a tribal or a non tribal, and so on. So, let me start by seeking how many of us still nod and believe that the father protects a girl in her childhood, her husband protects her in youth, and her son protects her in old age. A woman is never fit or rather safe for independence. Isn't that the question that comes to our mind? Now, we did see from a Hindu succession, property rights and a succession act that the Vinita Sharma versus Rakesh Sharma, I guess, the judgment, Supreme Court in August 2020 ruled that the daughters will have inheritance rights equal to those of sons in the properties of fathers, grandfathers, and great grandfathers, right from the codification of the Hindu law in 1956. Now, recent Supreme Court ruling, which was around January, mid-January this year, pronounced clarifying the inheritance law as applicable to a Hindu female, like the Hindu daughter inherits the self-acquired property of her father. The rule of inheritance prevails, and not the rule of survivorship. So, legal or the judicial system has been progressive in terms of not only impacting and influencing reforms, legal reforms, but also in progressive judgments. Now, does that impact how a woman is treated or given a share of the property rights or right to marriage and remarriage, the way it is envisaged in those black and white legislations? The answer is simply no, because had it been the way it's envisaged, we wouldn't have needed this conversation. Now, what acts as an impediment? Definitely the mindset, the socio-cultural tuning, the gendered understanding, the gendered roles that a society ascribes to a woman. And I very much echo with one point that came up from my esteemed panelists here, that women are definitely very powerful by way of existence because they create life within them. They are born to bear pain, and with that lingering pain overcome with the strength that they have within. So in order to suppress that strength and bring this force into control are very many manifestations of the patriarchal mindset that affected us yesterday, that's affecting us today, and will continue to affect unless we take up the reins to educate our mindset through the discussions, conversations, and practices at family level, at community level, at educational institute level, and in the corporate world, because corporate world is a microcosm of the entire ecosystem that we operate in, and it cannot be corporates taking on onus, the politicians or the legislative authorities taking onus. It has to be a whole round holistic approach towards addressing how can we interrupt the bias in the mindset, ensure we are thinking this not as a social change but as a need to propel the country ahead in the pace of development, and ensuring that we are not living behind the 50% of our population. If that answers your question, Pragya.
Thank you so much for your answer, ma'am. My second question to you is, do you think rituals and traditions form a major hindrance to women who belong to the professional and corporate sector and form a major roadblock to their ambitions and career?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are ample stories from corporate India which tells that women do get impacted, and very sometimes by their own choice or sometimes being compelled, they withdraw from the workforce participation. As I said, women are expected to be part of the paid labor market and the unpaid labor market. Women do not have, or rather, I would want to interrupt that bias on this conversation today. Why do we mention women as working mothers who go to offices, and those who work at home are not referred to as working mothers? Is my mother not working round the clock to bring me where I am today? If she hadn't done those work behind the scene within the fabric of the four walls of my household, this Nandini would have not been invited to this forum. I was propelled from there on. I have had those privileges in my life, be it my father, my husband, my friends, colleagues who have been the dominant group at a certain point in time. Now that we have become, you know, an equal force in the population of the country, they have been allies. But not everybody is that privileged. And that's where equitable approaches are very much required to create that level playing field. We talk about equity and equality synonymously. Let us understand that those two are not equal and synonymous. Diversity, as I always say, is in nature. And given the country we are born in, which is India, it is a maze of complex diversities and nuances, including intersectionalities. We cannot deny the existence of it. But inclusion is all about intentional nurture of mindset where we believe that there is a gap. We accept, recognize, and intentionally get bought into the idea of closing on those gaps. And how do we close those gaps? We close those gaps through equitable approaches. So let us understand equality and equity are not the same. Diversity is in nature, inclusion is in the nurture of, intentional nurture, and equity is an approach towards creating that inclusive ecosystem where safety, psychological safety, mental safety, physical safety, everything is taken into consideration, where the rule of silence is challenged. Women need to speak up, and that's what corporate India is looking at through their interventions in bias trainings, through their interventions around promoting psychological safety, and many other inclusive leadership training programs. So those are some of the ways. However, it cannot be a clap of one hand. We need two hands to make those clapping sounds. It's not only the corporate India enabling or the government enabling, but we as women, as I always say when I mentor women, when I mentor girl students, we as women have to take charge of our life. This is one life. You make your choices, own your choices, lead with confidence, and see who could be those critical allies in your ecosystem who can advance and fuel your career aspirations. Then we will definitely not see a decline of women in the workforce participation. But yes, to your question, Pragya, we do see impact of those social economic inequities that led women to drop off. And a very glaring example in the pandemic world, we saw a deeper impact on the lives and livelihoods on women. And many women who lost their jobs have refused to join back work because they have been heavily burdened when they before losing job in a work from home environment. They were working for office and home, all at home, with a blurring of the worlds. So they are under huge anxiety and stress. So corporate world is trying to address wellness quotient of their people, because we see women, or rather people, as a gamut of talent. and talent is what matters. So, wellness is very crucial that we are leading through. But again, let us take charge of our career. It's our life.
Thank you for your answer, ma'am. That was indeed thought provoking. We are now open to the questions from the audience. So, the first question is to Nandini, ma'am. Uh, as ma'am said that women do not hold important roles in the top tier of professional world, the recent law that rendered marital sex not a crime anymore, a major case of the patriarchal mindset of trivializing a serious case like marital rape, because I don't think a woman jury can pass such a law.
Well, this is very complex, and a lot of debates are happening around this. Marital rape, I would translate that into a, rather, I would call it under the banner of domestic violence, the way it is looked at in the corporate environment. There are a lot of companies who are working, who have realized with the spiking of domestic violence cases during the pandemic. And, once now that the return to office is back, with more anxiety on our women population, because they were getting into sync with work from home, with the blurring of home and office environment. Now they were almost in tune with that work from home environment. Now coming back to office, how are they integrating their work life? What has happened is there has been a serious conversation in the world of equity, diversity, and inclusion practitioners, understanding that we need to scope in messaging around domestic violence, ways to tackle it, and how can we show care and support to our women folks who are victims of domestic violence, because there is a direct correlation of business performance to an experience that a woman goes through when subjected to domestic violence, because it impacts their productivity, it impacts their mental health. So they do not get their full potential at work, and neither do the workplace get the best out of them. So I'm just keeping it in the environment of workplace. But definitely, when we talk about domestic violence, marital rape in a larger society spectrum, there are many aspects that needs to be understood. And again, religion would become a pivot, or rather an epicenter of that conversation, because each of the marriages are guided by their religious textures, religious laws. And then what tantamounts to marital rape, how should it be treated, and what are the ways to mitigate those, to ensure that the woman has a voice in the act of sexual pleasure, in the boundaries of marriage. Those are huge debates that requires to be done. There are judgments which are coming in here and there, but there has to be certain constructive direction which requires to come as a message to the world, where women get their voice back in the space of marriage. Hope that answers.
Thank you so much for your answer, ma'am. The next question is for Dr. Banerjee. Ma'am, how far is it justified if a woman chooses to adorn a patriarchal practice like wearing sindoor or wear any signs of marriage, even though she is a modern working woman?
That actually that question is sort of, it answers itself, because that is the sole purpose of why we are talking about gender equality. I will recall and I will quote to you a comment by the poetess who died very recently, Adrienne Rich. She, till the age of 47, 48, she was married to a professor of mathematics and the proud mother of three sons. At the age of 48, she came out of the closet. She came out of her marriage to denounce and announce that she was actually a closet lesbian, and she remained so till 82 years of age. Now, she said that she was asked that, ma'am, you are an active feminist. Do you want the men to be away from society altogether? Would you like a world without the men? And she was shocked and she said, "Oh my God, what are you saying? I mean, who will we fight against if the men are not there?" So it is taking away the thunder out of patriarchy by saying that we need them to fight. But jokes apart, to answer the question of Disha Sengupta, look, whatever a woman wants to do, the sindoor may be a patriarchal symbol, the Shankapala may be a patriarchal symbol, the Mangal Sutra might be a patriarchal symbol. But if a woman chooses to wear it, if she finds that it adorns her, if she finds that it gives her joy and happiness, she should have the independence and the privilege to do so. It should not be imposed. Nothing should be an imposition. Like it come when we come to clothes. As I'm very glad. Thank you, Nandini, for your comments on the housewife aspect. I remember I met a person and we were talking in a kind of a group, and so on says that my wife is that, my wife that, and then he suddenly said, "My wife doesn't do anything. She's a simple housewife." And I got so annoyed. I said that, "Dear Mr. So and so, being a housewife is the most complex act in the world. Why don't you give her leave for one day and do everything that she does the whole day?" So coming to this question itself, that a woman should be finally given the privilege of doing what she wants to do and what she wishes to do rather than following the impositions laid upon her. If a woman chooses to chuck her job and look after her child after delivery, that should be her choice. But if she wishes to work after the mandatory um, uh, what you call it, what leave is that? The leave for childbirth, I forget the term. Uh,
Maternity leave.
Maternity leave, thank you so much. After the mandatory maternity leave, if she wishes to try and go back to her work, she should have the privilege to do so. If she chucks her job and sits at home, that doesn't mean that she's being genderized and she's being subjugated. That could be her wish. I know a friend of mine who is a scientist who just left everything after two children back to back within 3 years. She said, "I'm enjoying this more for the time being." And then she took to painting. From being a scientist, she's a practicing painter and is having exhibitions in Mumbai. That should be her choice. So if anybody wants to wear the sindoor, why not? But that should be her want and her wish and her privilege and nobody else's.
Thank you so much for your answer, ma'am. I hope that answers our audience's questions. All right, then, with that, we come to an end to tonight's discussion. Thank you to each one of you for sharing your knowledge and valuable insights with us. I'm sure that our live audience that is watching this on Facebook had a wonderful time as well. I thank you all for taking out time from your extremely busy schedules and for being a part of this discussion organized on the TMYS platform. It was an absolute pleasure to have been in your company this evening.
Thank you so